Welcome to Front Page Pass. I'm Bob Yaling, and this is Alexa Black. And we're very pleased today to present a special guest. In fact, we're devoting the whole show to her. We've both worked on a lot of book projects in our lives.
Absolutely.
Both writing and editing and so forth. And this has absolutely been one of the funnest and most challenging and most rewarding projects I've worked on. And we actually started, Dr. Madeleine Randall, our guest, and I actually started on this 20 years ago in New Mexico when she did a medicine wheel healing with me. That's how I met her. And so we're in for a treat for the next hour. Dr. Randall is a medical visionary and futurist, and she's and so some of the things that are kind of the new thing today. She was doing and introducing to the world 40 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, she was really just ahead of her curve, ahead of the curve in terms of just where she was at.
Yeah, and somehow or another, she's put all of this together into a book called Soul Doctoring, which right now is being shopped to publishers, and it will be published next year. And on top of that, Dr. Randall hosts a wonderful Instagram TV show that airs every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific time, and a podcast called Soul Stories, which she'll explain later when we talk with her. But that's a wonderful podcast as well. It's on every week.
And we're really looking forward to having her.
Yeah.
She's a very intriguing guest with a ton of stories and, lots of knowledge.
And I can say this is going to be a little bit different than a lot of our guest authors. And every author is distinctive in their own way, obviously.
True.
But this goes to another level because along with that, I'll bet anything that during the course of the interview, she's going to be giving some very sage medical and healing advice that we can all take away with us into our own lives.
Yep.
So,
and we'll also be discussing the aspects of writing soul doctoring as well. So stick with us; it's going to be fun. So
it sure is. Well, today we have a very special guest who means a lot to me personally. I first met Dr. Gayla Madeleine Randall about 20 years ago. It's already been 20 years.
Yeah.
And I've had all sorts of associations with her. A dear friend. She's my doctor. She's a healer. She, in her book Soul Doctoring that we'll talk about today, I've been involved with that.
It's somewhat of a mentor in the medical realm as well.
And she's a medical futurist and visionary. And some of the things we're going to find when we talk to her today, we're going to some of the things that are now kind of like the big new thing, like plant-based and stuff like that. She was introducing that to the world 40 years ago.
Absolutely. She was ahead of the curve completely.
Completely.
You can
and
go back and watch some of those songs.
And it's just a great joy to have her on, and I'm looking forward to a really wonderful conversation. So since she, without further ado, let's just bring her in.
All right.
Welcome, Dr. Randall.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're on the show. It's really fun. I guess this is yet another iteration of you and me and our association with each other after.
I know. Who knew?
Yeah.
It's great to finally have you. We've been talking about having you on for quite some time. So here we are.
Was there even Zoom when we first met? I don't even think it existed.
I don't think it
existed.
No, because we met at a conference in New Mexico.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I was involved with a spiritual group down there, and then Dr. Randall was one of the keynote speakers.
Wow. Okay, so that's where you guys met. It's kind of the origin.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it just went on from there. So. Gosh, where to begin? There's so many different ways to go about this. But first of all, this obviously became your calling, and so then you went on to, after regular education, went on to medical school. But you had a really interesting for medical school. You worked in a very interesting place, the Sioux Reservation. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and then the profound experiences you had with the medicine?
Yeah, I did. I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to go to the reservation to do part of my clerkship. They called them clerkships or training. But honestly, Bob, it started way before that. When I was a little kid, I remember running out the back door and running over to the cornfields and lying between the rows and to watch the cornfields sway and wait for what turned out to be the corn maiden, or this beautiful, sparkly woman with golden hair, the color of the flax of the corn, and come to me and tell me everything's going to be all right. And she was dressed in regalia and things like that. And so, some people could call that dissociation or something, but it was real to me. And I believe it was real. And I believe that she was coming to me to, between worlds, to let me know that it was okay and I could continue, because I had a
Like a
little bit of a
tangible
rough
spiritual
childhood.
Mhm. Yeah, that was like a tangible spiritual experience for you, I guess. It really
Yeah.
influenced you throughout.
So, when I got to the reservation, and later when I trained with Joseph Royale, he told me, oh, that was the Corn Maiden, like
Wow.
very nonchalantly. I go, oh, of course.
That's why, yeah.
And I guess I don't look unlike her. So who knows, right? So anyway, yes, I went to the Sioux Reservation, and then when you show up at the Sioux Reservation back in the day, this was years and years ago, the actual doctor or PA, whoever was working there in the clinic, leaves because that's his vacation and you're covering. It's like, okay, because I wasn't really even an MD yet. I was a senior medical student. Of course, you know a lot, but you don't have that MD after your name. But the nurse was there. I always found nurses are great resources. So, but what happened was one day, and I always opened up the clinic. I'd come in the back door and then go to the front door and there'd be people lined up. Well, this day, a woman, there was one person there and a woman, because I came in early and she fell into my arms and she smelled of smoke and she was burned all over and her propane tank had exploded during the night on her and she'd been waiting there.
Wow.
And she was blue. Her skin was about the color of the wall behind you. And she was wheezing and breathing like that. She was not in good shape. And they didn't have, helicopters that came to the reservation in those days. And this was right between Sioux Falls and Rapid City. So it was pretty far away from anything. But we did call the ambulance. We got her up on the table. We did what we could do, gave her oxygen, gave her what's called a diuretic because she had water or fluid in her lungs. They were burned. And so with the oxygen and the fluid and removal medication, and also gave her steroids, that's about all you can do and oxygen, until something else is available. And so I looked around sort of frantically and I told the nurse, look, get somebody. This boy came in and I said, go get everybody that she knows or that knows her or that is her relative and bring them here to pray. And so they did. They came and we encircled her cot where she was and we prayed and chanted, and pretty soon we hear the ambulance, and she'd already turned pink and was getting better by that time. So
That's amazing.
prayer is amazing, and prayer still heals, and I still pray for my patients both before I go in and every day. So
Yeah. All
And I
right.
feel like there's a fine line, between a fine balance you can strike really between the scientific and the spiritual realm that a lot of doctors don't exactly touch on like you do exactly. So, I feel like that's of great importance, really.
Yeah, my experience with Dr. Randall has been that it's integrated and merged
Exactly.
with her.
Right.
Where, as you're right about, there's a lot in the medical profession. Yeah.
So what happened after that was the same boy came back to me that I had sent out to get her relatives and said, the medicine man wants to see you at his house at sundown. And I thought, oh, I'm in trouble. And so I headed out there at sunset, and it was in South Dakota and Nebraska, we have what's called big skies. And the whole sky was red. It was heaven fire. And, it made me kind of happy and less scared. And all the little reservation dogs are following me, their tails wagging. And as I went up to his house, he's standing on the porch, big chest, looking out like an eagle. And his mate, she was so beautiful. She was sort of round faced and her little eyes were like diamonds. And they were smiling and welcoming me and telling me to come in and eat with them. And we spoke, and then they told me to come back the next night and every night. And after a few weeks, they told me that their ancestors had told them that they were to teach me their ways, that I was going to do something different and share it with my people to change things on the planet. So it was a great gift.
Oh, that's
It's a really
wonderful.
profound experience.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
And
of
then I went
course,
back seasonally, so it didn't end for like 4 years.
Hmm.
okay. And then, and you're, and I guess at this point, I introduce, you're involved with many things, but two that are really exciting right now, and this just keeps the conversation going, are your books Soul Doctoring, which you've spent years working on, and also your new podcast, Soul Stories, and we'll get to that in a minute. Mm-hmm. But the thing about Soul Doctoring, I think that's really, would strike a reader first and foremost, is that today, we have this big push to plant-based foods. Mm-hmm. We hear a lot more about integrative medicine, and all of these other more progressive ways of healing. But you were doing that 40 years ago, and mm-hmm. you were one of the pioneers in bringing that into the consciousness of America. Could you talk about the early days, the pioneering days, and as part of because I know that's part of the premise of writing the book.
Sure. So, it was interesting because through those experiences, my early experiences, I knew there was more. And even as I was training as a young intern, and when I became a resident and even a fellow, I loved science. So I'm really both things. I invented a lot of things at UCLA that are used today, like things to stop ulcers from bleeding. We invented that, and a lot of things. And so, but even so, I was always interested in the esoteric side of things. I'd go back to my patients' rooms at night and ask them, what were things like at home? What were they eating? Did they drink alcohol? Were they smoking cigarettes? And how did they feel? I didn't just look at them as their organ that was sick, which was very prevalent in those days when I was training. I knew there was more. And even so, as much as I loved science and still do, I knew there was more. And then we should add those other things, those other disciplines, because I had my basis with Native American medicine. I became interested in other modalities. During my training, I learned Chinese medicine. I learned Japanese medicine. I learned Ayurvedic medicine. And so we did the first studies. They were landmark studies with Emran Meyer at UCLA, where we added one of those medicines to our medicine on people that had sort of reached a dead end. So that was a game changer. Nobody was doing things like that then. So that was, like I said, a landmark study. And then we went to the desert and did consensus conference and did more things. But it all started there really in a big way. And I also saw very clearly, and we didn't learn in medical school and fellowship I'm a gastroenterologist, and they didn't teach us anything about nutrition, which I could see. It was so blatantly obvious to me how important it was. So I taught myself. I went and found education on it. And then I found the functional medicine people and the integrative medicine people. And of course, I became certified and then I became board certified in integrative medicine later on. But I learned all those things before. As a matter of fact, I showed up one time at Scripps Institute for one of Mimi Guarneri's big conferences. And then I learned that was the conference where we were all going to take the boards. And I hadn't studied because I didn't know.
Wow.
I just showed up to take the course. And Mimi goes, "Oh, come on, Randall, you've been around forever. We know you know it, just do it." And so I just took it cold. And I did very well because I had immersed myself in all of those things, which is what we were being tested on, which was
right.
very affirming for me.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about?
I had Mimi on my podcast actually, and we talked about that experience together.
Can you talk a little bit about soul doctoring and kind of how it covers all facets, mind, body, spiritual, and that's just something that I feel like greatly sets it apart from most medical, self-help style books. So can you just talk a bit about that, how you, include every single facet within the book? kind of your
Sure,
approach
I
to
don't know if
that.
I included every single facet, but
Well,
it
yeah,
is a
but
journey. I start out with
yeah,
some of the stories like we talked about,
right.
my sort of autobiographic journey that sets the stage for how I launched into learning different modalities. And then I talk about the different modalities in a patient form. So I present patients and how they healed, and each one addresses a different modality. And so people can read those things and learn what might be good for them in their self care, or what modality might help them with their illness or disease, if you will. And it sort of moves through those. So that's how the modalities are presented. And then it moves into the current ills of our planet. So it goes from personal, because once you do your self care, I always say personal and planetary health go hand in hand, because once you do your personal health and you get into this integration, you get into the idea of connection, it's just natural to turn and look to our planet and see. If you look at the planet and you because you turn from inward to outward and you see where she's suffering, she tells you exactly what she needs. She tells you exactly, and what she needs is what we should be doing. So what are the ills of the planet, and it'll tell you, well, maybe meat is not a great thing right now, because growing the corn and the grain to feed the cows, which become the meat, is what is most contributing to the carbon in the atmosphere, which is most contributing to global warming. So that's just an example. And also the ocean, which is a big thing. We have so overstressed the ocean that it's very sick. And if we don't pay attention to what we're doing and change our fishing practices, we'll have no fish by the year 2048. No fish.
Oh, that's
And we
sad.
can't have an ocean without fish. It won't survive.
No,
They need each other. And so
exactly.
80% of the oxygen comes from the ocean, and it harbors a great amount of CO2. And guess what keeps that CO2 harbored in these little beds in the ocean? The fish. The fish swimming. Isn't that amazing when you add together all of the motion of, you wouldn't think that that would do anything. Of the fish swimming is what keeps the CO2 harbored in their beds. And if there are no fish, what's going to happen to it? It's going to come
Going
out
straight
and
up to
go
the
in the
stars.
Exactly.
atmosphere
Yeah.
Right.
and
Right.
add to the carbon debt and increase global warming exponentially. So we just have to start paying attention. So these are some of the things that I talk about, and more. How we can help our planet, and it's not hard. One of the main things is change to plant-based, which, by the way, is number one, the most healthy thing you can do. I've healed people with cancer. You can reverse heart disease, read Dean Ornish, with plant-based diet, and we can save the planet at the same time, which is, of course, essential.
Kind
Yeah.
of goes from the individual to the collective, I
Absolutely,
guess.
yeah. And we have more questions, of course, about soul doctrine. But one thing I wanted to kind of drill further down on, and I know this firsthand since I worked with you on this book. You very consciously hyphenate the word disease. So instead of saying disease, it's dis-ease. Could you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that's just such an important point that I believe if people consciously made that, put that hyphen in there, I believe that alone, if they really internalized it, that would create a lot of healing on this planet by itself.
Oh yeah, because I was brought up in a disease-based system. And right away, I thought, this is not the right emphasis to emphasize, and it's still that way. Western medicine is disease-based; it's about the disease. But what we really need to emphasize more is the wellness part of it. Like it's dis-ease rather than something that's a sentence that you have to have for the rest of your life once you get that diagnosis. Diagnoses are great because it's a way to classify things and understand
Right.
things. So I'm all for that. But you also got to remember the other side of it. What's the wellness side? And when you hyphenating that word emphasizes that it's a disease or an imbalance in your body, unless it's gone on so far that it's just so ingrained in your, and all that means is we don't know how to unwind it yet, but we are unwinding things that even do involve the DNA. This, now we know there's epigenetics, and you can change those things. If you change the environment, the way you're eating, the way you're thinking, the way you experience the world, you can change your DNA. I mean, making a cancer go away is changing your DNA. So
yeah, true.
Changing heart disease is changing your DNA. So once again, back to what you're eating, and not just what you're eating in your mouth and in physiologically, but what are you eating in your mind, in your spirit, in your heart, emotionally. So that has a lot to do with it too.
Yeah, and I think that some of the medical industry hasn't, a lot of the medical industry at least hasn't exactly, grasped a hold of that concept. So I was going to ask kind of, how do you feel that the medical industry is lacking as it stands, and where, could we evolve, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'm a positive person. So I think when I was training, it was worse. Now they are starting to wake up. They are starting to have some minimal amount of classes in nutrition and spirituality and compassion, things like that in medical schools. So I think little by little it's starting to happen.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole other side. There's a whole other side to your legacy and your story that is reflected throughout Soul Doctoring, the book, and that is your association with Native Americans, with Native peoples, and all the work you've done with them, and also just how it's just an intrinsic part of you, as we alluded to earlier with where you did part of your medical school work. Could you talk a little bit about how that evolved after the Sioux Reservation, and then also how you've incorporated the logos, the whole belief systems of Native peoples through medicine wheels and through other things, to to just be part of the way that you not only treat patients but how you live your life.
Yeah, well, that started right away, Bob. After I spent the time with the Sioux people, they told me I'd have other teachers. And I did, in fact, have many teachers. I had Joseph Real. I began to Sundance. As a matter of fact, that's how I got the vision for the book. As you know, and we tell some of these stories in the book, is, I was doing a Sundance, and the Sundance is really a dance that you do. I was invited to do it. It's a dance where you dance without food or water for 4 days and 4 nights in the hottest part of the summer for sacrifice. And the sacrifice is made to receive a vision for the planet, to improve the planet. And it's all the people. When they say all the people, they mean humans, but they also mean all the animals and plants and things and even stones. Everything has a spirit. So you're dancing for all the people. Omitakiyasin is how they say it in Sioux. And there are many different ways to say it. In Tiwa, it's, I'm blanking on it right now. Seneho Chuanke Taene is all the people. And so on, I think the 3rd day of the Sundance, I began to have a vision. And the vision was a talking circle of elders. And they were talking about a woman that appeared in the smoke in the middle of the circle that was coming from a fire. And I was watching this and I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my goodness, that's me. And they're making a decision, and they finally come to a decision. And then I see the planet, the earth is spinning above. And then I put my hands like this, and the planet came into my hands. I guess you can't see my hands there. I put my hands like this.
Got it.
And the planet came into my hands and turned into a book. And then I got the message. That's what I was supposed to do. I was supposed to take all my teachings and put them in a book, and so that I could share them with the people, that it was going to help them. And of course, I hadn't even mastered all the disciplines that I needed to master to write that book at that time. But that was my vision. That's one of the things that drove me, and it still is.
Yeah, and one of the beautiful things about soul doctoring, which I should tell everybody, is now being shopped to publishers. So you could probably expect to see it, I would say, in 2022. But one of the things about this really great book, besides all the healing advice and all those types of things, is Dr. Randall's storytelling, how she tells stories. It's very native, and just that rhythm and cadence. And of course, I know as a book editor, I notice the different ways in which people tell the stories, right. And that's just one of the most beautiful parts of the book, is just how it just feels very native. The delivery, right. the way you tell stories.
Thank you. Thank you. There's something I really have to mention is how the other bookend, one of the bookends is health, self-care, how we achieve it, and through many different disciplines, Western medicine included. But the other bookend is about healing us and the planet by becoming one. I call it one mind, but coming together as a collective, because we know that if we can change our minds and, point our arrow in the sacred direction, pretty much the same sacred direction as each other, that it changes the energy of the planet. It's been measured by satellites. It's been measured in the individual. But, and now Deepak Chopra and Mimi Guarneri from Scripps Institute are going to be doing sort of these collective broadcasts just about that. So, and this is something that I wrote 20 years ago. So
right. Well, and that's what we've kind of a sub theme of this whole conversation is just the fact a lot of the things that are coming into the public consciousness right now are things that you were doing many, many years ago, which is part of being a visionary and a futurist. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and back to soul doctoring. One of the things, another thing I love about the book is how you weave the stories in with very practical advice, but unlike and better than a lot of books on healing, you take the point of view like, I'm going to show you guys as much as I can, and in some cases have the reader elevate their own awareness and understanding of the subject to meet you. Now, a lot of people will kind of simplify it to just a really simple place, but you actually challenge us to learn more about ourselves and about the healing process in the experience of reading your book. Could you talk about that a little bit, and then also just talk about how important it is that we become more self-aware of these things, of actually how we heal, not just what to do to heal.
Right. So it's not a recipe book. So it's not, okay, if you have this, then do that. It's right. I really want to take the reader or people by the hand and bring them with me to experience, the healing process. And it's, of course, we are talking about different modalities in certain situations, like to different people, but in every instance, it's an experience, because we do it together. So I try to show the person who's reading the book through feeling it, feeling what happened there, feeling what I felt, feeling what that person felt, that they can come along on that journey. So by the time we reach the end of the book, we're ready to move into that one mind together.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wanted to ask a little bit about the technical aspects of just writing soul doctoring. Could you guys kind of talk about what it was, that whole process was like to begin with? Like, how did you catalog everything and, categorize things? I mean, was it kind of just more free flowing, or were things planned out in advance as far as chapters and everything are concerned?
So, well, my job was easy.
This book has been a long time in the making. So.
Yeah, well, Dr. Randall wrote everything, and I just helped her piece it together. So my job was easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it pretty much flowed out of me. Like, so it isn't something that I outlined and said, because it's not a scientific book. There is science in it. Of course, there's a lot of science in there, but it's because it was appropriate to the situation. It was more the journey that I saw, was
And the
the
science
bigger
drove the
picture.
story.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and in structuring
Makes
the book,
total
that
sense.
actually was both one of the joys and one of the challenges from my end, because unlike, this isn't a linear book whatsoever.
Exactly.
It's not chapter one, chapter. It's just not.
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
It's just not one of those things where you just go from one place to another, because it's all integrated. And so one of the challenges, because there's a lot of storytelling and plus all of the the medical aspect of it, and
The underlying science.
not to mention the fact that Dr. Randall is licensed in masters 12 to 15 different modalities
Yes.
or more. So part of it was to present it as a journey, but at the same time bring in all of this much, the more practical information. So that was a challenge, but it was also a joy, because if we put it, if we got to the point where we put it together correctly or put it together well, it just became this journey, not only of the healing of oneself, but also of the awakening and arising to our highest consciousness
Exactly.
and our highest potential. And so for me, anyways, as the editor, that was like I said, both a joy and a challenge. That's the best way to put it in my case.
Yeah, I understand, or I've been told, and I don't know if this was you that told me this, Bob, that one of the biggest challenges is knowing the end of the book. But when I started the book, I knew the end. So,
which is crucial.
Yeah, even when I received the first vision, I knew the end.
Wow.
I knew where I was going. And then it was pretty easy to fill in, because the first part was, a lot of it was my experience. And then, part of it was things I needed to experience, but it's all things that, came from my life and what I saw. And I knew the ultimate thing was about the planet, but it was also about collective. And the only way we're going to accomplish it is if enough people, and it doesn't have to be everybody, but if enough people come into the same one mind, we don't have to go through bureaucracy. We don't have to go through all the hard, we just go right there. Things will change.
Yeah. And I just wanted to ask you a couple other questions that I think our viewers and our listeners will find fascinating. And that's having an appointment with you when someone goes into your office, because when people go into the office, little do they know which modality you're going to pull from. Could you talk about how you read the patient intuitively, and besides the medical assessment, of course, and could you just talk about how you figure out what you're going to go with? Because like I just said, you have a gigantic toolbox of healing tools. Yeah. And I'm just curious to know how you go about that from when.
Well, now I would say after all of the experience that I have, and I'm still learning. I still learn every day, and I love learning and adding to my toolbox. So I continue to, but I have a system, and it's not unlike going to another doctor's office where I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I may ask questions that you don't normally hear. And what I hear a lot of times is not even in the words, but the spaces between the words, if you will, and the energy that I read from the patient. It's not, everybody even knows exactly what they want to say, but if you listen to the patient long enough, everybody comes with their own answer. And it will come to me in between the lines and the things I see and the examination. It just comes to me, and then I know what they need. And it may be a combination of an herb, it may be a combination of an herb. Maybe they do need a pill, maybe they need a medicine for a minute, but always there's going to be something natural in there as well, because it helps them get away from that medicine or other medicines. Exactly. Maybe they come in to get off medicine. But it may be a physical exercise. I may give them a meditation or a breathing. I may teach them how to breathe. So it's a combination of things. I may say, you really need to wear the color blue around your neck. or, maybe they need to communicate better. Maybe their thyroid is not, I see these things as the process unfolds with each patient. It's very individualized, but it's very clear to me.
Yeah. And so and along those lines as well, I wanted to ask if you give some practical advice for our readers and listeners again, and that is dietary changes. You've been a proponent of plant-based diet for a long time, and but that's it's a really tall ask to ask somebody who's been eating one way their whole life to just suddenly push that away and go to this other thing. Now, in my own case, I had a strong enough will that I did exactly that 35 years ago when I switched, and that's how long it's been since I've eaten meat. And I switched, and I was done with meat, and that was it. But that's hard. I mean, that's really hard for most everyone to do. So, what would your advice be to someone who knows they have to make a dietary change, but they're afraid to do it, or it's just such a tall ask to just switch over like that? Where would you start them?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And it is hard for people. Like, I had a young gentleman the other day who had come from Louisiana to visit his relatives. And he had, for all the world, a bleeding ulcer. He passed blood, and then he passed black stool. And of course, I was one of the top-notch hemostasis doctors in town for many years when I was at UCLA, about however many years that was ago, more than 20 years ago. And so I know this like the back of my hand. So I knew what to do Western medicine wise, but also in investigating further, when a lot of hemostasis doctors would be just like scope them, apply the hemostasis, give them drugs, and let them go back to Louisiana. But of course, I wanted to know, what are you eating? What's eating you? What's going on? And it turns out this young man's a welder, right. And he was having a lot of headaches, and he's having a lot of upset stomach. And I'm thinking, maybe heavy metals, and then I'm also thinking, then he said there's a lot of stress in his family. And I don't know if you know, but of course, if you've been watching the weather, Louisiana's really gotten blasted the past couple of years. And
yes.
They were out of their house. That, alligators were in their house, it was so badly flooded. I mean, it was bad. And that's pretty stressful, right? So then he has a wife and a little baby, and they all had COVID, and that was really stressful. So they've been through it. So I think that, and he was been taking a lot of Advil for his headaches. And then I found out his testosterone was low. Well, that causes headaches. So it was a, kind of plethora of different things that needed to be addressed. But I told him, one of the things you should do, because you're really inflamed, is decrease your meat. And of course, Louisiana, they're very meat oriented, soul food, seafood, right? The whole bit. And because he was in a tender place and was willing to listen, I could get him to, work with me. And he's going to, try to decrease it to once a day to begin with, and then maybe go down to 3 times a week. And in the meantime, we're doing his workup, but he understands. And I explained to him how inflammatory meat, especially industrialized meat, is, and that it comes with cytokines, and they come in your body and they attract white cells and create more cytokines, like an exponential inflammation is like that. And then I explained to him that's where the vast amount of diabetes comes from. That's where heart disease comes from, and about 70% of the chronic illness that we have in our country. And he understood, because he's not dumb, right? So he's willing to give it a try. He wants to be healthy, as a young family, and and his wife used to be a vegan, so we've got that on our sides. And we're gonna, he's gonna work on it. And then you have to stay in contact with them and counsel them along. You can't just say, "Oh, do this and bye." You have to help them out with. She already knows how to cook that way, so that helps. I don't have to.
Yeah, that is a big advantage.
But I always tell people, look at my Instagram, because I put a lot of healthy plant-based and they're yummy, recipes up on there, and you can just copy them. And so there's that. And a lot of the stuff that I present in my book, and also have these on my Instagram TV, are, scientific. I give statistics and, all of the data that's behind it. So this isn't stuff we're just making up. This is stuff that's really happening. And, I give all the data and statistics about it, including the planet, the plant-based foods, the whole thing. And then, we talk about different subjects. So.
Yeah. And just to elaborate on Instagram TV, it's on every Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And they're wonderful shows. And on top of that, as you mentioned, you have thousands of followers and just constant great advice that you put up on there, and along with some really inspirational quotes and things as well. I mean, it's almost like its own variety show. It's really cool.
It's all very insightful.
Yeah. And along those lines of other things you're doing, you also have a dynamic new podcast called Soul Stories. You started that several months ago, and you've just had these
more than a year
guests.
already, Bob.
Yeah. Well, okay. More than a year. I can't believe it's been that long. But
24. We're on 24.
Okay.
Wow. Okay.
But the thing about Soul Stories that I find really amazing is you're bringing in guests from literally all walks of life. I mean, you've got healers, actors, just a whole bunch. But the thing in common is that they are really dynamic souls that are changing the world in their own ways. Could you talk a little bit more about that podcast? What inspired you to begin it, and just what the thrill of it is for you personally?
Well, it's the same thing that inspires me every day, and that's to help the planet. I'm very planet minded, and when actually I was invited on Richard Radstone's podcast called Ghost Stories, and during the podcast, it actually came to me. I sort of had a vision during his podcast that I should do a podcast. And I told him, I said, I've always wanted to do a podcast on people and how the energy of their story is what brings us into the cosmic consciousness together. And if I have people on my podcast that have done that, it's going to inspire people to move in that direction, into that light. And he was moved by it, and he's a very experienced podcaster. So I thought, okay, let me do it. And he coached me, told me all the equipment to get, everything to do, and all the nitty gritty stuff. So I just did what he said. And I started inviting people on my podcast. And it was, like you said, they're very diverse, but what they all have in common is the planet, the planetary mind. Some are regenerative farmers. Well, they think about the planet. Some are actresses and actors, and they're very planet minded. So the last one I did was Nobuko Miyamoto, who is a Smithsonian acclaimed artist. And she has been an activist and an artist, and she calls herself an artivist since a very young age. And now she's in her 80s. And she's been, admitted to the Smithsonian. Her art is in there, her music. And it's all about the collective consciousness and, people advancing evolutionarily in their minds and connectedness and crossing boundaries between peoples and integrating all peoples, not just Asians, which she's Asian. So of course it's a big deal right now with the women in Georgia being killed and whatnot. So it helps us bring the work forward, because she is doing this new technique called Fandango Obon. Obon is a ceremony which I've been to many times because one of my best friends is Asian, and it's about dancing in a circle, just like natives do, and coming together through that circle. So now she's doing it only with different cultures, which is amazing. So that was my last guest. So it's been so much fun.
That's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask, kind of touching upon that, can you kind of discuss why taking a preventative approach in healthcare is of the utmost importance, other than simply being reactive and come to the doctor when something is wrong? Like, how can people improve that as far as longevity is concerned?
Well, you just said it, but Yeah, I mean,
well, okay.
yeah, I
Answer
mean,
my own question.
we
They're
could,
good. Patient answering their own question.
yeah,
Maybe you taught me well.
yeah. I mean, it's so important, and it's so. The thing is, it's so doable.
Right.
You know, it's so doable. It's people end up on all these medications, you know, big pharma, and big pharma doesn't want to let go of that because
No.
that's what
That's their money.
supports them, you know, and it's just astounding, really. You know, I saw this T-shirt once, and it says, "I take this medication," and then underneath it was, "I take this medication for the side effects of that medication," and it's like kept
No
going
kidding.
down, 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 down. You know, it doesn't stop, and they end up with 12 medications, and they're all doing something not so good at the same time as forcing the body to do what they're trying to do. Lipitor, for example, and a lot of people are on Lipitor. I'm sure it's probably one of the most prescribed medications, causes diabetes. And a lot of people don't know that. And you can lower cholesterol with lifestyle, with changing to plant-based, for instance, and exercise and decreasing your stress. So, and I work with this all the time with people and get there. And there are herbs that can help cholesterol as well, which I'm very familiar with. So, this is the holistic, upstream kind of medicine we want to get to, as opposed to treating it downstream with a pill and ending up with a side effect for each medication.
Taking the completely synthetic
Not that
route.
medications aren't good. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against
Right.
life-saving medications or Western medicine by any means. I'm just saying, there is another way that we can get away from having to take so much of them.
Yeah, and I know because you're a medical herbalist as well as prescribing pharmaceuticals, and I know I like one thing that speaks to me about one of the problems in this society with pharmaceutical companies is the reason why they named Adderall. And I read this when I was writing my book Beyond ADHD several years ago. But Shire, when they created this drug, they were trying to figure out a name for it, and they named it Adderall. And it breaks down to ADD for all. The point being, they're going to prescribe everyone. And this was right after the Ritalin craze. So
sounds about
right.
Yeah,
and that's really a hard box to break out of for so many people, not knowing just how much of a concerted effort Big Pharma is making to keep us on these things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And actually, Big Pharma creates most of the medicine Big Pharma creates is for the animals that are being raised by the meat industry. So they're very much keen on keeping the meat industry the way it is, because they don't want to give that up. Most of the drugs they make go for cattle and pigs and whatnot. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you would never think of it being that intertwined, honestly. Most people.
So we get to eat those too if we eat, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not against meat either. So, if you're going to eat meat, at the very least, eat grass-fed, pasture-raised, happy cows, or even better, regeneratively farmed, because that pulls down carbon and gives back to the earth. Right. So that's the way to go. It may be more expensive, but then we really shouldn't be eating it that often anyway. So
exactly. Well said.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to believe, but we've already run out of time.
It doesn't seem like it at all.
We just started. This could go on for hours and hours and hours. However, thank you so much for being our guest. And I just want to remind everyone that Soul Doctrines, by the book by Dr. Gayla Randall, that will be out next year. It's currently being shopped with publishers. You have your Instagram TV that's on every Friday night at 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific time, and also the fabulous Soul Stories podcast. Anything else you'd like to add?
Yes. Be kind. Be compassionate. And think about that one mind. Think about tuning into the collective consciousness. It's there for everybody, and it's a two-way street. So if you move your consciousness higher into that place, you also receive. And you can, you'll get pieces of information that will help you in your life, and it will help the planet.
great message to close with. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Gayla Madeline Randall, for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyway, so that was a really intriguing discussion with Dr. Randall. I've been looking forward to that for quite some time. So you guys, if you want to find out more about her, her origin, or just her tips and tricks that she has, from years and years of knowledge, you guys that are still with us, be sure to check her out on social. We'll drop the links below. So we're going to go ahead and do our ritual here at Front Page Pass, where we talk about the chart toppers on New York Times bestseller list. So
yes, and Aaron James from our team has, as always, given us the 5 top fiction and nonfiction selling books from the New York Times list. So why don't you go ahead with fiction?
Okay, with fiction, number 1 we have Legacy by Nora Roberts, which is new this week. On number 2, we have The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Day, 4 weeks on the list. And that's quite an intriguing read also. Number 3 is Shadow Storm by Christine Feehan. How do you pronounce it? Okay, I'm always butchering the pronunciation. I apologize, guys. New this week. Number 4 is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, 4 weeks on the list. And number 5, still on the list, is Sully by John Grisham, which is 5 weeks on the list. So,
and I'll just mention about Andy Weir that this is this is the book following The Martian, which of course became a great movie. And I'm looking forward to reading that book. That's going to be
it really is.
If it's anything like The Martian, it's going to be really fascinating.
That's what I was thinking, Bob.
So on the nonfiction side, number 1 is Killing the Mob by Bill O'Reilly and Martin Dugard. And number 2 is What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Number 3 is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. Number 4 is Zero Fail by Carol Leoning. And the concept of this book is really an important thing. It gives us permission to fail. And we live in a society sometimes where we're told we can't fail. You can't fail. Well, the thing is, you can't progress unless you fail.
Exactly.
That's
you learn
just
from
simple
those failures.
truth.
Right.
The greatest people at what they do in this world failed. I mean, Thomas Edison failed 10,000 times before he found the key to the light bulb.
Exactly.
So this is a really important book, I think, especially now. It's just such a high pressure time. And then number 5 is The Premonition by Michael Lewis.
And now, before we go, let's talk a little bit about our future guests. We have some really interesting people coming up to chat with. So.
Next week we have a treat for you. Especially it's summer reading season. It's also a summer book club or book club season at libraries.
Right.
Summer reading programs. We are going to be honored to have on our show many times best-selling children's authors Sherry Fink and Derek Kent, who are a husband and wife team. And
awesome
do you remember like when you were a kid, the Scholastic book fairs and stuff at the schools? Well,
absolutely.
they're a book fair by themselves, and I'm not kidding. They have the name of their business is Whimsical World, and it's not only a presentation, it's just it's a pure show, and their books are not only are just great reads. Sherry does young readers, and Derek is more of a tweener author, their books have they're value-based. It's value-based writing, and wait till you see this. I mean, this is going to be a program that any parent, any teacher, any educator, and any kid, including the kids within us, is going to want to see. So that will be next week, and then following that, we have 2 other really captivating guests coming on, and that's Nora Novak, who was kind of a social ingenue and in LA for a long time, and she's an actress and a model. She's a great writer, and she's also a great artist. But back in the 70s and 80s, she used to host parties that you name the people in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame today, they were there.
Exactly.
David Bowie, Rod Stewart, on and on.
It's impressive.
And anyway, so Nora wrote a book called Los Feliz Confidential that's now being looked at for possible film treatment, her memoir.
Exactly.
And she's going to have many great stories to tell us. And then the other person that is going to be a future guest is Barbara McNally, who I had the pleasure of meeting about 10 years ago when I edited her first memoir. And Barbara is a author who specializes in women's empowerment. She's a great mentor. She's got a great life story, which includes having to learn to be empowered in herself. She's a fabulous writer, and again, she's just going to she's just going to be a wonderful guest to have.
Absolutely.
And then it's coming on down the line, just if you get your calendars out, we'll have a really good friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of working with off and on for 20 years, and that's Charles Warner, who's the publisher of, or the CEO of Innovative Properties Worldwide, which is a publisher of Innovation and Tech Today, and 4 other magazines, including Sustainability Today, STEM Today. And Chuck, he's fabulous. He's a live wire. He's a great storyteller. Yes. Just a joy to have on. And we'll have Chuck talk not only about his magazine properties, but also how writers can pitch magazines, and with the many platforms they have today, whether it's online or print or podcasting or broadcasting, all of which he does with his enterprise.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah, so we've got a very busy month and a half coming up with these fabulous guests, and
just in a month and a half.
Fun.
So I mean, you can just think about over the next year what all Word Journeys is going to be involved in, honestly, because we plan on taking this on the road eventually, as we've talked about in other podcasts. So we've got quite a bit going on. So be sure to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at Word Journeys, or it could be at Word Journeys Literary. I'm not sure. But anyway, so thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.